Understanding others' behavior is going to be the biggest part of social perception that we're going to talk about. And it's so big that I've actually divided it into two parts. There'll be a part 3A and a part 3B. So the first thing to know is that we all give off a lot of nonverbal cues, and we interpret other people's nonverbal cues. And this is why when you're reading an email or a text message, it's much harder to know if somebody's serious or joking or sad or happy, because all you have is what the words are themselves and no nonverbal cues. So there are about 6 or 7 universally recognized emotions that we are all able to recognize. So I'm going to put up a picture that has the 6 or 7 universal emotions. I want you to pause the video, see if you can recognize all of them, and then when you have finished that, unpause the video. So most likely you were easily able to identify anger, disgust, fear, happiness, surprise, and sadness. And if you identified contempt, it was probably because you did it via process of elimination. So that contempt picture, it could be like a sideways smile where somebody's kind of like, oh, that's kind of cool. Or it could actually be contempt. And that's why we kind of disagree about whether it's universal. But regardless of contempt, those other emotions are absolutely universal. Everybody recognizes them and everybody knows what they mean. Now, when I lecture about this, somebody typically brings up the show Lie to Me, which was a show that used to be on TV about this guy who supposedly was an expert at understanding nonverbal behavior. And I have mixed feelings about that show because on one hand, it's true, we do give off a lot of these cues that somebody who's really good at decoding them could actually learn a lot about how we feel. But if you said to me, how much do you like teaching? I might shake my head no, but say, I love teaching. And you would say, wait a minute, she was shaking her head no, but she was saying she loved teaching. So does that mean she doesn't love teaching? But in my mind, I might be thinking, how could you ask me that crazy question? And that's why I'm shaking my head no. And I'm saying, I love teaching. So to me, I'm being consistent. I'm just not necessarily vocalizing the thing in my head that's producing these nonverbal cues. So while we have all of these nonverbal cues that we are all easily able to recognize, it's not necessarily easy to know exactly what a person was thinking about that had them manifest that nonverbal cue. Talk about Harold Kelly's covariation theory. And covariation theory helps you decide whether something is happening because of the person or because of the situation. So again, to go back to an earlier lecture, it helps you make an internal or an external, or a dispositional or a situational attribution. Okay, so the first thing that we'll evaluate is consistency. And we'll say, does Jamie's computer freeze up every time she uses it? And in this kind of situation, it's the same person in the same situation. The next we'll ask, does Jamie's computer freeze up for other people? So it's a different person with the same situation. And lastly, we'll look at distinctiveness. Does Jamie make other computers freeze up? So it's the same person in a different situation. And if you know the answer to all three of these questions, you will probably be able to say whether it's something about the person or about the situation that's causing the outcome. So covariation theory says if you can look at how these different situations play out, you can understand and make either an internal or an external attribution for somebody's behavior. Last thing we'll talk about in this lecture is correspondence bias, which is also known as the fundamental attribution error, which in class you'll probably hear me abbreviate it as the FAE. And the reason why I typically call it the FAE is because that's how I learned it. But it seems to be becoming more common to refer to it as correspondence bias. But anyway, correspondence bias says you make dispositional attributions for others and situational attributions for the self. And I'm going to explain why that happens. First is there's differences in attention and perception. So when we observe someone else act, we're mainly visually aware of the person. We're just looking at what that guy's doing. And that guy is dancing his little butt off. So we're going to say, man, he loves dancing. But when we act, we are mainly visually aware of the situation. So we see what's around us. And so in this case, you might say, well, I was dancing crazy like that because look at this crowd. They were cheering me on. I just was swept up in the moment. So in this case, what's happening is when we're watching somebody else act, we're kind of filtering out the situation and we're just focusing on them. And so and attention-wise, we are more likely to make a dispositional attribution because we think, well, all I'm seeing right now is that person. So the reason why that person must be behaving that way is because of something about that person. Conversely, when we act, we aren't looking down at our own bodies. We're not looking at ourselves. And so we're mainly visually aware of the situation, what's presented to us. And so we're more likely to make situational attributions for our own behavior. The next reason is for efficiency. And linguistically, it's more efficient to make internal attribution for somebody else's behavior than external attributions. And here's why. If I'm going to make an external attribution, I have to say, he was in a dance-inducing situation. That's kind of a long sentence compared to, he loves to dance. So linguistically, it's easier for me to get the words out when I can make internal attributions versus external attributions. And it's also more predictable to make internal versus external attribution. So if I say he loves to dance, then I'm going to be able to predict his behavior across situations. I'm going to say he's going to dance no matter what. That guy is just a dancer. He wants to boogie down. But if I have to make situational attributions and say, well, sometimes he dances and sometimes he doesn't, depending on the situation, it's much harder for me to predict how he's going to behave because then I have to take into account all this information about the situation every time I want to think about whether or not he's going to dance. So it's much easier on me to make internal attributions if I want to predict what somebody's going to be like. And as we've talked about already in every chapter, and we're continuing that theme talking about it in this chapter, we are cognitive misers. And so linguistically and with predictability, we want to invest as little effort as possible. And so we're going to do the most efficient thing. And that means that we make internal attributions for other people. But with the reason why we don't do this for ourselves is because we think that we are these unique and wonderful special snowflakes and that we need to have every little detail of ourselves explained. And so we're willing to do that extra work for ourselves, but for other people, it's just easier to make an internal attribution and be done with it.